Namaskar, I am Jyoti Kiran. Welcome to the third episode of DD Bharati's very special program, History Hunter, a program that takes you through journey in time. In the previous episode, we discussed about antique books, the smoker's corner, the vintage two-wheelers and war medals. In today's episode, we have many more interesting things to show from the vintage memorabilia collection. So, welcome to the vintage world. Welcome to the world of vintage poster memorabilia. As you can see, there are many posters behind me. The posters belonging to the bygone era, the handmade, hand-printed posters of Bollywood films, the posters of bygone era advertisements of cars and all. So Aditya ji, how your passion of started with the collection of these posters and ads, hand-painted, handmade posters?
Posters have riveted our country for the last 80 to 90 years. As a matter of fact, they have been one of the main communicational mediums used by especially the Bollywood industry and the advertisers. 50 years back, 80 years back, we did not have all the advertising mediums. We just had the posters with which we used to connect with the masses, and they have a history of their own. We had black and white eras in those areas, and we wanted to communicate on a color basis. So the posters were actually hand painted from the pictures that were taken by the black and white cameras, and then they were transferred into plate, which came in up as the litho prints. So they have a very interesting history behind their own stories, and how what we look at today as the photoshopping was done by hand in those days. That's what makes collecting the vintage cameras and the pictures and the advertisements a lot interesting. Let me show you around some very interesting posters which are there in my collection. The first one we can see here is an Agfa Isoli ad, where we have a beautifully hand-painted tiger and the poster then transferred into a litho print. Similarly, if you see, we have one of the oldest Cadbury's hand-painted poster of the 1954 year, where the actual Cadbury milk chocolate packing was very different, and you can see the hand-painted poster there. Some of the other interesting posters or the advertisements from the same era, we have the Hillman Minx, which is a 1952, and these are original ads which appeared into the magazines at that time. I was trying to make sure that I get the actual ads, not the ones downloaded from the internet. So I actually located the magazine which carried those ads. So we have the Austin 40 Somerset, which is there. We have the Morris Oxford. And interestingly, these posters or these ads actually had to be shot overseas and then brought in, because we still lacked the technology in the 1940s to be able to produce these ads. So that's what makes the vintage posters, the story behind them, a very interesting one. So most of the things that you see here are the litho printed ones or the actual hand painted ones, which have been then transferred to a printing medium.
What you see through the lens of your eye is what is short-lived. What you see through my lens is what lives through time. Your image in the mirror will yield to age, but your image through me will defy age.
Wow, a huge collection of vintage antique cameras. Aditya ji, we have heard you have over a collection of 100 cameras. So tell us something about your collection of antique and vintage camera.
Why don't you have a seat? See, cameras have been around since the late 1800s, but cameras actually started becoming a usable factor around the 1920s to the 1930s. Cameras have a huge historical value to it, and it got me attracted a lot because the technology in the cameras has been changing drastically. So it was a pleasure, or it was something to be worth digging out for, where I actually put together cameras right from the 1930s to the late 80s, when the first Polaroids started coming in and the idea of instant photos started happening. So I have managed to put together 100 odd vintage cameras, which include a few very iconic ones, from the Mamias to the Rollicords, to the Vigneshwara field cameras, to the Houghtons of the from England, to Adox 66. I can show you some very interesting cameras, and if you go back to the movies which came in into the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, you can actually see a lot of people using those cameras. So it's been a great journey trying to put them together. As a matter of fact, I have a very beautiful projector from the 1950s. This is how the movies were projected there in that times. So this is the movie which is still being unexposed, and this is the roller on which the movie would be loaded onto, and the projector would project out. Now the projector, if you see, came in from Austria at that point of time. And the cameras, I can show you around some interesting ones. If you see, this is a small bellow camera. It's a small field bellow camera, and this used to be done with the plates which were placed here. If you see around, I can show you that how the plates were positioned. The openings of this had to be done so that the exposure could happen. So these were silver oxidized plates which were inserted inside this and then clicked. If we see some movies which were there, we used to see that gentleman putting these up on a stand, putting up a black cloth and running behind to get the pictures which were there. So these are very interesting cameras where the adjustments to the lenses could be made, and the British and the Germans were mastered this art for us. So though in 1940s we started making them in the country as well, but we have a lot of iconic bellow cameras which used to come in from that era. As a matter of fact, very interestingly, we moved on from the bellow plate cameras to the film rolls. As a matter of fact, most of the current generation hasn't even seen the film rolls, leaving apart that. So these were the film rolls which we used to put in something like the bellow camera you are holding, the Agfa Isoli. So these were the film rolls which used to be loaded on. And actually photography used to be an art. Why? Because once this is exposed, you don't alter it, or you don't Photoshop it, or you don't make changes to it. So that's what made very interesting aspects. And cameras have gone through a lot of changes. Let me show you some actually preserved, very well preserved cameras. This is a Mamiya C33, a professional one. And it's actually been used 3 times, because the guy I managed to get it from only used it 3 times in his life and actually had kept it in a locker for the last 45 years. And it still comes in with its original packing, its original manual, its original bill, and is still scratchless. So there are a lot of people who have managed to keep things and protect them, and that's what makes me take up the idea of actually putting them up together, for maybe putting it together for the next 50 years. So these are some of the cameras which actually make you feel that if people have preserved it, they need to be further preserved. Plus, we have a lot of different companies coming up and playing their roles. We had the Jiva Box cameras which were coming in, the Jiva Box, or we had the Adox 66, as I told you, and they had very interesting mechanisms of loading on. If I show you how they were loaded on, see, this still has a film inside, and the film used to be rolled up like this, the exposure. So this was how the reels, and you see the reel is a very different paper reel in the 1950s than what you saw coming in into the 90s. So this is where the technological changes made cameras a very, very interesting factor. Then we moved on to the era of the Polaroids. Now this is a very interesting Polaroid, because if you see, this has a 4 lens Polaroid. So you could take instant photographs choosing the lens which was there. So Polaroids came in with very interesting stories as well, eventually in the 1980s, where the plate, you get the instant photography concept started. We can walk through and see a few more very interesting cameras.
Sure. Aditya ji, this is a huge vintage camera. Tell us, looks quite wonderful. Tell us something about this.
See, this is a field camera. The field cameras were used in the 1930s and 40s, basically by the government to test out and click pictures or for the geographical stories. This was later adopted into clicking in for the normal people as such. So this is a 2 feet long camera, and surprisingly, if you see, this is an Indian made camera. We managed to get in the technology from the Brits, and we started making the Vargheswara cameras in Chennai. So this camera actually is an Indian made field camera. This is late 1930s and is almost 2 feet long, and there have been many versions of it and many sizes in which this is there. This has been one of their biggest sized cameras that is around, and it's been a very well maintained piece. So I managed to get it from a photographer in Kerala. So that's how it is, and it has the very interesting, as I said, the plate cameras. This is where the manual plates used to be put in, inserted, so that the cameras could click the pictures. This is how the exposure used to happen. The exposure would be done up like this would come out, and then this would be pushed back in as soon as the exposure was made. So this is where it was placed behind this, and this is what was sent out to the for the washing of the camera plates. So this is a very interesting piece which I have. We have a lot of other cameras on the similar lines. As you saw, this is the original Watson camera, which was made by the British Bellows, and as I said, it comes in a lot of shapes and sizes. Now this is the smaller version on the cameras which came up. This is a Zeiss camera, which is an icon camera, and which came in with very interesting features eventually. This came in with a top viewfinder. It came in with a balancing story where you could actually see if the picture is centralized or not before you would end up clicking, and you could actually roll it back and pack it once it was done. So the Bellows cameras have had their life. They've ruled the camera world and still look the most beautiful of the cameras. From here, these cameras passed on to the Aqua era, as I would like to call it, and you see the Aqua came in with such beautiful looking sleek cameras in the 1940s, called as the Movex cameras. So the Aqua came in where you had the viewfinder where you would look inside into the camera instead of doing it from there. And from here, the technology of the cameras passed on to the twin lens cameras, where you could see the cameras could be viewed from the top. You could place it on your tummy level and then look at the picture and click. So that's how it has evolved and has come to this point in the camera history.
Aditya ji, antique vintage cameras are valued by the collectors for the various reasons, and you have a vast collection of cameras. Our viewers would like to know how difficult it has been collecting such a big number of vintage cameras, and how price-wise, if you would like to tell us how difficult it would have been to gather all of them.
See, of course, it's not something that you find off the street. It's not something that you walk across to a mall and buy. It is something which are usually buried at people's homes. And luckily, a house cleaning story in India is a very common one. So every now and then you see people cleaning their houses and things actually coming out. So one needs to keep his ears and eyes open to have them. But there have been specific cases where I've been wanting very specific ones. For example, till about a year and a half back, I never had a Bellow camera. So I actually was searching the length of the country to find Bellow cameras. And the first camera that I found was down south in Kerala with somebody, a photographer. So it's been a search. It's been that you need to make the efforts of finding it. So luckily, it has borne fruits. And as far as the price goes, it's a bit difficult to actually put a price to these things, because you can get them dirt cheap because people just wish to throw them off. Yes. So you can get them dirt cheap, while the others who value it, the others who understand it, actually ask for the real price that it beholds. So I have bought cameras at dirt cheap prices, and I have paid high thousands for a lot of cameras as well.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, this is the first digital camera which came into India, and Kodak brought it in India in the year 1986-87. So that's the latest of the, you can call it as the digital camera, the father of digital cameras in India.
Light, camera and action makes a film, and posters promote the film. and you have a vast collection of we can see Bollywood films of 1940s, hand printed, handmade posters. We would like to know how difficult it would have been getting these posters and from where you got these posters.
See, posters luckily have been kept behind by a lot of cinema halls which closed down and the distributors which closed down. So, as a matter of fact, down the years, they have started getting value. Earlier, they were just paper for them, but over the years, people have started appreciating and doing that. As a matter of fact, a lot of posters come in from Bombay still, which comes in from either collectors, comes in from studios, comes in from people who have stacked them. So I've been lucky to have posters as old as 1940s, 1950s and 1960s. And that's what makes them do well. And surprisingly, like all the other things, people who have kept things well have really kept them well, because you can see this poster of Roti that you see here is a 1944 movie, and it looks like a brand new because it has been kept into one of the studios in Bombay, and now just about 4 or 5 years back they offloaded whatever they had. So the Roti 1944 poster that you see, or if you see Azad 1951, or if you see 1956 Barish, though Barish has been a real fight. As a matter of fact, it's been in a very bad condition. It took me almost a week to put it back together, and still the top part is missing. So I actually have put each small piece, and if you touch this paper, it's gone so bad that it just goes away. So, but otherwise it was such a beautiful poster that I was no way wanting to let it go. So I put it together. So it's been a good theory about the posters where you can actually still find a lot of them, and most of the people do end up appreciating it for the hand painting aspects of it, which was done in those eras.
So we can say that making posters was a tedious job in those days. Artists used to make them by hand and then they were converted into litho prints. Nowadays it's the synthetic vinyl prints, which is a easy task. So now let's move on and see what's more in store in Adityaji's collection.
Some possess me for fancy. Some possess me for need. Some possess me for grandeur. And some possess me for greed. But they know not that I possess them for being their dream chaser.
Adityaji, let's take our viewers on a ride through the past. You have a good collection of 10 vintage cars and several two-wheelers. We can see a beautiful vintage car, Austin 7. Tell us something about this car.
See, this happens to be my second oldest car that I have. This is an Austin Ruby, or Austin 7 as it used to be called in. It's a 1934 model, and it is a very, very nice car because it came in with a lot of very interesting concepts. This used to be brought in from England at that point of time and used to carry the spoke wheels, as you can see, which were the traditional mark for the vintage cars in that era. And it used to be the people's small car. As a matter of fact, the Austin Ruby used to come in with two different types. It used to have an open roof factor as well. And this one is the one which used to come in with the closed roof factor. And it came with a very interesting factor. If I show you the air conditioning systems that existed at that point of time, this is how the windows used to open so that the air could flow in from the external points. So even at that point of time, the comfort was kept as the top priority for the riders. So it is a very cute looking car, and I love driving it around at times. Let's move on and I can show you some other very beautiful cars which are around. The one which you see here, which you are on your left hand side, is the Austin Somerset. Okay. It also used to be called in as the A40. It used to come in into three different models. This is a 1952 model which is there, and this has been of course restored. All the cars that you see here have been restored to their values, and this actually used to look like a very beautiful car, and it's slightly different from the Morris Oxfords which eventually led on to the ambassador as such. I'll show you the ambassador of that time as well as we walk through. So this car is more on those lines. Now,
Right.
as we walk through, what you see here is what we have as my prized collection, and as a matter of fact, I should take you for a ride in this today as well. This is a 1946 called in as the American Mafia car. This is a Hudson Super 6, and it is the only car we have in Delhi. This weighs about 3,600 kgs and is a car which the American mafias, if you go and see the 1940s and the 1950s movie, you would see the mafia chief coming out from the back seat, because it used to represent the boss, it used to represent the royalty for the Indians at that point of time. And this is, if you see the number plate, it comes in from one of the royalties near Calcutta. So it is a beautiful piece, and as I said, they're restored and they still run. So I should take you around for a drive in this.
Okay, so as you said that Hudson was a car of mafias for Americans and a car of royalty for the Indians. How difficult it is to maintain these vintage cars?
Of course, it's a very difficult story to maintain the vintage cars. It's easier to have a look at them, but it takes a lot of pain, effort and energy to actually get them into running condition, because without them constantly being serviced, without them constantly being taken care of, they would rot away. So the idea has been to maintain them and keep them alive as long as I can. So that's the main aim behind keeping the vintage cars. I have 14 of them now, out of which I have managed to have 11 of them in a running condition. The rest 3 should soon join the restored gang.
So do you participate in vintage racing cars and things like that?
No,
also?
I actually haven't participated in any vintage rallies, but I've had a couple of my own vintage car shows which have been around. So that's been more for my friends and the acquaintances that I've done it. So I've had 2 vintage shows of my own.
Have you ever been approached by any period filmmaker for the usage of any of your cars?
Not really as yet, but a few people have come in asking them for their weddings, which I've flatly told them, sorry, I don't do that, because everybody has a charm of actually driving back on their weddings into a vintage car.
So if ever in future any period filmmaker will come down to you, you will offer your car?
Yeah, for a movie I don't mind, because it gives it the decent coverage and the due respect to the car.
Aditya ji, it seems to be a very long, huge car, Dodge Kingsway. Tell us something about this car.
See, this actually used to be the second of the what used to be called in as the American Giants. They used to have 3 cars which were called in as the American Giants: the Dodge Kingsway, the Hudson Super 6 and the Plymouth Savoy. So luckily I have all the 3 of them now. So this used to be the longest car to have hit the Indian roads. It edge to edge measures 17.5 feet, and this used to be again one of those prime American cars which used to be seen around. So it's in a running condition. I need to get it repainted and redone, but it is a beautiful car, and it can be driven around still. I've got the engine restored, so and it looks beautiful. If you see the fin tails of this car, that has been the most interesting factor of this car, because this fin tails used to represent this as a totally out of the spacecraft space shuttle look which was there, which was the theme, as I would say, in the 1950s. The space used to be a very crucial and important factor. So this is where the Dodge Kingsway comes in as a very, very important
Special
and a very
feature of
nice
it.
car with special features. The Plymouth Savoy took over after this. It's actually the Dodge Kingsway itself, but a newer version of the Dodge Kingsway. And what you see here is the Morris Oxford. This is Morris Oxford is basically what you call in as the father or mother of the modern ambassador. The modern ambassador came in from this car. The Morris Oxford was the last of the cars which was come in as the Morrises. After this, in India it was changed and it was made into the Ambassador, while Morris carried on its cars to 6 series. So the last of the Morris 6 came up in the year 1967. As a matter of fact, I have that car. I can show you around that car as well.
Captain Russell, क्या तुमको पता है? I bought a Morris Oxford. It is such a beauty. It's going to be delivered today.
I'm sure it's a beauty, sir. Finally, raising the lagan of these peasants paid off. Cheers, General.
Cheers, Captain.
Okay, as we saw there, this is the Morris Oxford 6. This is the 1967 Morris, and as a matter of fact, this Morris was the last of the Morris which used to come into India. And this Morris has been a bit unique because this is the time when actually Morris placed the engine in a very different format into the car. If we see a car, you see that the engines of the cars are vertically placed, but in this, the engine of the car has been horizontally placed. If you see, this is an engine which has been horizontally placed instead of the vertical placement of the car. So this makes this Morris a very unique Morris in itself. So this was the characteristics of the Morris 6. I can take you for a ride into this as well if you want. It's running today.
Men may come and men may go, but these are eternal. The memories, the memorabilia, and the artifacts. I hope you all enjoyed watching the journey in time as much as we enjoyed making it for you. Thank you so much. Goodbye.